Well, everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Stuart DeCue. I'm the director of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. Thanks for being here. This is a talk in the Sabin Sustainable Venture Prize series, which is a $25,000 winner-take-all prize that's offered every year to the Yale student, faculty, staff, business that really both promotes an economic and an environmental return. And so that application deadline for anybody in the room who's still considering applying is March 24th. You can find all the information on the Yale Center for Business and the Environment website. Today, within this series, we're thrilled to co-host with the Program on Social Enterprise a Taste of Innovation from Farm to Table. And the person who's going to be moderating this discussion is really the leading voice at Yale that's helping people convene around sustainable entrepreneurship in food, Mark Bomford from the Yale Sustainable Food Project. If you guys haven't been up to the farm or talked with Mark in the past, really is an incredible resource which we have here at the university, which everyone should take advantage of and try to fill up as much of his time as possible. With that, before getting to Mark and our speakers, I want to introduce Tony Sheldon, who's the director of the Program on Social Enterprise, to say a word.
And that's pretty much all I wanted to say. It's a pleasure to be co-hosting at SOM with two SOM alums and with CBAE, the panel. So without further ado, please.
Excellent. Is the mic picking up right now? Does it matter? So it's wonderful to see all of you here today. As Stu said, I'm Mark. I direct the Yale Sustainable Food Project. And on about my second day here, I think, I actually met Patrick, who is our first panelist. Patrick runs Waldingfield Farm, and if we're trying to give an example for our students of saying, here's a farm that has kind of grappled with the complexities of growing in this part of the world and actually made it, actually done something rather magnificent, scaled up, and is doing world runs, go talk to Patrick. And we do send our students out there in the Harvest program every year, and as they move on, I think we've had more students who have gotten in touch with Patrick, helping him on all sorts of interesting projects. Patrick was a good starting point, but then Patrick had seen the food system in very different forms, had been there to see it in a very different way from the way that you are seeing it now. And that will actually be my first question. And they've also seen the food system at different scales. They've kind of been there in all of the different pieces of this complex, from production through distribution, through marketing and retail. And so I think between our panelists, we've got a wonderfully qualified group of folks to answer your questions that we'll have at the end. So Joe Dobrow is, I guess he came a little bit before Dan Horan in the School of Management. But from our conversation today, both these guys were doing food at the Yale School of Management before anybody else was doing food, and really stepping out and doing some amazing things. And I'm hoping that we'll hear a little bit about that. And now, of course, they are doing food in a very big way, tackling the distribution and the retail side of this growing and very interesting sector. And where I wanted to start with the questions was actually, how has the food world changed? Tell us a little bit, starting with Dan, about how things looked when you were here as a student in the School of Management and how different that is today. And then we'll move on to Joe.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. So I showed up as probably Yale's token farmer in 1993. I started an organic vegetable farm in northwestern Connecticut when I got out of college in 1989, which is Waldingfield, which now my brothers run. So the food environment then for a farmer, if you were in Connecticut or the Northeast, it was pretty much you were a dairy farmer. If you wanted to grow things, you might grow transplants for places like Home Depot and greenhouses. If you had the best land in the state, you were a tobacco farmer. So if the Connecticut River Valley going straight up to Vermont, it's all flat, great land, you grew very high-end wrappers for cigars. And if you were in the retail business, you were on the healthier side of things, you were sort of a health food person, basically a freak. If you were selling to restaurants, the higher end chefs were appreciating the freshness of local food. And if you were in any larger scale food operation, you probably had long since stopped trying to obtain through traditional distribution methods anything local. So that's sort of how it sat in
'93, and you can see where things are today, but I'll pass along.
Joe, what was your experience back then?
Sure. I'll talk in the microphone because I think this is just for the live stream. I'm sure you guys can hear me anyway. Gosh, when I was at SOM, graduated in 1992, most people would go across to what was then Donaldson Commons for their meals, or they would go up to the Stop and Shop in Hamden. Not me. I was really into natural foods back then. They were hard to find. There was then, and is still now, a little store out on Whaley Avenue called Edge of the Woods. Anybody been there? All right. That's great. And so, yeah, I would sort of seek out the, weird carob-coated rice, brown rice type foods that the freaks and other health food folks that had been sort of struggling through the 1960s and 70s were still eating. Really on the fringe. Nobody really was paying very much attention. Working in the natural foods industry for a company called Freshfields, which had been founded in 1991 down in the D.C. area. And it was an East Coast predecessor to Whole Foods. In fact, Whole Foods ultimately bought Freshfields in 1996. And the very brief market-sized natural food store, and just feeling like the angels were singing, because that was the first articulation that I had seen that there was something more than just a movement out there. There was a business. So, as I say, ultimately, Freshfields got bought by Whole Foods in 1996. I became the head of marketing for the entire company, and have gone on to all sorts of other retail posts in the natural foods industry since then. It's now a $100 billion industry and growing. It's projected to more than double by the end of this decade. So that is a stark contrast to the days of going out to shop at Edge of the Woods.
Patrick, in your experience, since you've taken over Waldingfield, how has the production changed since those days?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I've seen a couple of things happen. One, you needed people to buy. And on a large scale, wholesale distributors, supermarkets, they were remarkably reluctant to break their chain, their guaranteed delivery from California, all these things. So you had to prove that not only could you grow for scale, but you could be there every week. And that actually forced us as a farm to innovate and get better. The case being, Dan had gone into New York City to work for a supermarket retailer. And all of a sudden, my twin brother and I had a buyer in New York. So the opportunity, which is often where it all starts, if you have an opportunity, you seize it. We just started to grow more. And we learned along the way how to clean, how to box, how to deliver, how not to arrive in New York City at 9 a.m. You get there at 5 a.m. Because if you arrive at 9 a.m., you're there till 4 in the afternoon. You learn this chain. And stores like Freshfields, an early client of ours in Ridgefield, they saw the writing on the wall that there were going to be new growers and producers in the food world in the Northeast who could deliver. But at first, you had to prove it. And so I've seen that. Like, if you get to know that, you can scale up.
I just want to throw in a quick little funny story. So I call up my brothers, and I say, I think I got someone that wants to buy some tomatoes. So I go, yeah, how much? I think about, 5,000 pounds of them. Really? How much does our truck carry? I don't know, like 2,000? Wait, it's a 1,500-pound truck. All right, just fill it and come down. And then you got to come down. So they show up with a Subaru, a second car Subaru, jammed with tomatoes. So we had a truck and a little Subaru filled with stuff coming down. But because we found a buyer, but that's when you were bringing that up.
Actually, Dan, since you brought that up, I wanted to ask you about some innovations that have happened in the value chain, in our post-Subaru distribution world. What have been the major things that have changed since that story?
Well, I mean, I guess for my perspective is local food. I spend a lot of time thinking about a region's agricultural strengths. So I'm in the milk business, I'm in the apple business, I'm in the egg business. I work with my brothers on the farm more as the kibitzing, bothersome older brother. But my main focus is to, I mean, my company, we have a trademark from the farmer's market to the supermarket. We're trying to figure out how to get things off of farms into mainstream supermarkets where everyone can access them. And so the big changes that we are observing right now, just in the last few years, I mean, I started this company 4 years ago. I've been thinking about it for a while. It was actually my SOM essay to get in, was this business that I'm running right now, is that because it's such a tough business for farmers as well. I mean, in the early 90s, farmers didn't quite know they were about to be extinct in the Northeast, but they know now that the party is over, and if there isn't dramatic change, they're just not going to be here. And so from an infrastructure standpoint, we're starting to see, somewhat reluctantly, but we're starting to see some cooperation on this transportation. So there's an expression in the industry called less than load. So if I have a truck rolling down the highway and it is less than load, it means I got a little space on it. And traditionally, a farmer who's very entrepreneurial says, okay, I'll just have my own truck. I'll just have my own thing. It's like, well, you know what? There's somebody else running down right by you. Let's see if we can piggyback on that truck, because a lot of the money in the food system is tied into the transportation system. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how that's going to work, and I think that there is increasingly, I think there's increasing innovation in that area, and particularly, and that's a far cry from when I first started.
Joe, there's also been huge changes on the retail end, as you were mentioning. What are some of the big trends right now that are reshaping retail?
Yeah, both on the retail and the manufacturing side. On the retail side, you know, you could go up to that Stop and Shop in Hamden, assuming it's still there, and you could probably find most of the same brands that you would find in Whole Foods or in Edge of the Woods, because what we've seen over the course of the last 5 or 10 years now is this hybridization of the industry. You know, it used to be that we really kind of divided the consumers up into very distinct niches. And so you had your co-op shoppers, and you had your natural food store shoppers, and you had your conventional shoppers. Those distinctions are now all blurred because as this industry has succeeded, as it has proven the triple bottom line model, you've seen all of the conventional supermarkets and all of the conventional manufacturers jump in. And so it's fairly easy now to go into any store and find a lot of those foods. There's a statistic I love to throw out. You guys don't have Kroger around here, but they are the #1 conventional supermarket chain in the United States. And Kroger introduced a private label line at the beginning of 2012 called the Simple Truth. There's a natural version and there's an organic version. And it was a roll-up of a few different private label brands. So it didn't exist on January 1st, 2012. At the end of 2012, it was a $1 billion brand. At the end of 2013, although Kroger was not issuing any numbers, they did come out with a statement that said that if you could take all of their natural and organic food sales and create a standalone company off of that, it would easily be the second largest natural foods retailer in the United States. So if you interpolate a little bit, knowing that Whole Foods is at $12 billion and Sprouts, the #2 store, is at about $2.5 billion, it means that Kroger's doing maybe $6, $7, $8 billion in natural and organic food sales right now. That is an amazing turnaround, an amazing change in the industry.
So, Patrick, you've got these big players moving into the market, certainly on the retail side and on the distribution end as well. How does a small business like yours gain any foothold there?
I think there are a few things that people getting into farming need to know. There's always going to be somebody bigger than you, always. And there's probably going to be somebody who's going to beat you to certain doors. But on the flip side of that, my twin brother and I have always taken the idea that competition is great. It's going to make you a better farmer. And you can learn a lot from the big players as well. Packaging, production, getting something from A to B. How do they do it? Piggybacking on a truck. Hey, I got to move 250 cases of tomatoes in. You're coming down 84. Can I go back to back with you in Southbury? Let's do it. Those are things which Big Biz shows you the way. And in the organic world, we're, in the Northeast, we don't have we're not in the position to kind of, I think, to dismiss big organic. I think that's wrong. I think, if anything, you need to see what they're doing and get ideas from them. But, being a certified organic farm in the Northeast, yeah, okay, I can only grow about 20, maybe 30, maybe 40 acres. That's not even a blip in California. But I can't worry about California. I'm interested in my local economy. I know that a farm like mine survives to deliver that product and beat somebody else to it.
Packaging, which I think is so interesting. Again, you look back in the history of the natural food industry, which, by the way, I did in my book. But when you look back at the history, packaging was the last consideration. It was hard enough to grow organic food. It was hard enough to process natural and organic food and then find a distributor and find a way to get into retail. Packaging? It was not even a consideration. What changed that initially was when Celestial Seasonings first became a big company. And they had, these beautiful, whimsical packages, very colorful, all sorts of philosophical sayings on them. And there's a little story I tell in the book where when you first saw Celestial Seasonings packages land in these bland, brown, old health food stores, it was like that moment in The Wizard of Oz when it switches from black and white to Technicolor. That was a major innovation. Now, fast forward, you see companies like Seventh Generation, which came out with a 100% non-plastic liquid laundry detergent bottle. It's all made of cardboard. It's an amazing innovation. Or if you look at Honest Tea, a company near and dear to many of our hearts, their innovations in plastic bottles and trying to, PET, and trying to take a lot of the weight out and get rid of a lot of the resin, although it has created some enemies for them from people who don't think you should be using plastic at all. It actually has helped to build the sustainability cycle. So those are terrific innovations that we see on the manufacturing side.
Dan, as we're talking a little bit about the things that grabbed consumers yesterday and are grabbing consumers today, are there any particular messages that you see are resonating now very, very strongly to increase demand? Have you had to adjust your approach, your messaging, your communication, and marketing?
Well, this actually bridges from the last question, which is if any of you are thinking of getting into a small enterprise, which often when you start things, they are small. And sometimes you start something and it's really big right off the bat. But I think there's an incredible amount of opportunity in just being nimble and being able to adjust your message and learn from your customers very quickly. And so I think one of the things, I get between probably 300 and 700 comments a week from end consumers in the supermarket who are buying our milk, who are buying our apple juice, cider, eggs. And so we're constantly listening. And I think that there is a very high degree of resonance with this idea of being connected somehow to your source. I think there's a very high degree, and I think those create tremendous opportunities for the entrepreneur in the food space, because those are simply things that a large company cannot achieve. You can be if you are really big, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to suddenly be a cozy little company. It takes a tremendous, it takes me packaging, and we're teeny. I can't imagine instantly probably about 5 months. So, and we're also teeny. A big company, it's much, much harder to be nimble. So I think that this idea of being close to your consumer and creating a direct connection with them is one of the things that we're hearing a lot. And one of the things we hear around the world, global things they're buying. And they want to know all sorts of things, but that they want to feel part of a local economy. The economy is crappy. That might not be popular to say, but the last few years it hasn't been that good. And people want to know that their dollars, particularly in food, are going towards something that they are part of. And I think that's a very strong message that we're going to see leverage more and more. And the companies that really deliver on that, I think, it's going to be good times for them.
It sounds like it's a really strong message. Is the other strong messages that have come forward? Are you seeing conflicts between any of them? I think there sometimes a consumer perception might be that it's a zero-sum game. Do I go local or do I go organic? This one looks good for the environment, but was it good for people? Any thoughts on messages that have been conflicting? Is there a way to overcome that?
I can keep going on that, and then I'll share here. So a big challenge that I hear all the time is local versus organic, and I guess from a starting principle is I actually don't believe there's any conflict at all. I don't even think there's any competition, because if you were to take all of the local and organic businesses in the Northeast and put them all together, and if they all went out of business right now, we would miss them for about, that's it. No, you'd still get milk, you still would get everything. So I try to emphasize, let's not be too self-important here. The consumer base is fickle, and they care about you a little bit, but they really want to get on with their lives. And so in terms of the conflicts, we're often, you're not organic, why local? Do you use this? Do you use that? And we try to say, look, I mean, I own an organic farm. In 1990, I can tell you that it was like you were truly a freak. It was you. There were no organic standards. But the idea is that you've got people that are trying to farm. We need to support them if you believe in that. We've got people that are trying to protect open space. We've got people that are trying to solve transportation issues and lower carbon footprints. We have people that are trying to clean up the water. We have people that are trying to build local economies. All of those messages can fit within all the things we're talking about here. So what we try to do is to emphasize that it's not a zero-sum game. And in fact, it's a big, big market. And even as I refer to even the spilled milk in the milk business is, we could be a $100 million company and no one would ever heard of us because the milk business alone is like $15 billion. So there's a lot of room, and spending the time worrying about these conflicting things, this is not a panacea. Someone is always going to find a problem with something that you're doing. This is not about being holier than thou. This is about having an idea and putting it in action and being able to live with the warts. Do you have comments on that?
Well, keep this in mind. For all of the heroic efforts of Dan and Patrick and Gary Hirschberg from Stonyfield Farm and Seth and Barry and all of these folks who have built this industry up over the last 30 years, it still only represents about 5.5% of all food dollars spent. So there is enormous upside potential for us. 95 out of 100 people walking on the street out there are not buying natural and organic. They're starting to become more aware of it because these guys are doing a fantastic job of creating quality products and educating them about it. But when you realize how much upside there is, when you realize how big the industry has gotten, and it's still only 5 to 6%. I'll tell you a quick story about local and how confusing it can be to try to define that. When I was running marketing, the second largest natural foods retailer out there now, we opened a store in Roseville, California, in the suburbs of Sacramento. And we were very excited to be able to tell people that a lot of the produce that we were selling in that store had been grown on farms that were 50 miles or closer from that location. What we did not tell the consumers, because I was so clever in the way that I marketed it, was that that produce that had been grown there could not be grown efficiently and economically by the farmers and then shipped right to our store. So, in fact, it was shipped all the way down to Los Angeles, down to the produce markets there, at which point we bought it and trucked it back up. So it had a massive carbon footprint. Was it locally grown? Heck yeah. Did that really mean anything? No. I think that story is not in the book. And by the way, the book is not in Sprouts stores, probably because of that. So.
Patrick, do you have any thoughts on, because I know the people here are curious to know about what the next things might be, what innovations might be waiting in the wings or waiting for them to take advantage of. to reach that 95% who is currently not part of that market? What are your thoughts on things that might be coming down the pipe?
Well, I guess the best answer to that, you got to kind of go back into our first couple of years when we started farming. We didn't really know, worked very closely with a couple of big-time chefs, it turned out. Grow this tatsoi or bok choy. We were, huh? What? Just grow it. We're going to buy everything you can grow. So little did we know that between 1990 and 2000, there was a greens explosion in the U.S. To the point where we just found out what Earthbound is 53,000 acres. And I don't want to say they're all greens, but a lot of it is in greens. And that was an innovation which we got directly from on a very micro level from a chef, from a friend. And we now know as producers that you need to be one step ahead. How do you do that? Well, at our farm, for example, we take farm trips. We go to other competitors because that's where you share ideas from. You get ideas from other producers. I go to California each year. I go to Northern California and South Bay, and I meet farmers and say, wow, we don't grow this in the Northeast, but this sells here? Oh, yeah. Can I do it? I look at my zone. I check. Okay, this might work. So that first year, maybe you take a bath on something. And I guess I can take the example of my twin brother went to school in California at one of the Claremont schools. And he came back, and in 1993, I think Dan would correct me if I'm wrong, but we could barely sell a tomato. Everybody had a backyard red tomato. But the heirloom tomato industry did not exist on the Northeast at all. He comes back from California and says, in Claremont, we have these in killer. Look at these tomatoes. We got to start growing these. And that, by the time we figured out how to grow it in scale, when we kind of went from 1,000 plants to 35, 40,000 plants, we had a buyer in New York. We had wholesalers who all of a sudden, whoa, you guys, you grow this? Yep. And all of a sudden, for a couple of years, we were ahead of the chain. Now everybody's got heirlooms, so you've got to kind of restructure. We figured out, okay, so what do? We created a small food company which makes pasta sauces and Bloody Marys and things which use these products because nobody else was doing it. And in turn, it kind of you're looking for things. Now, what's in the future? I don't know. I think as a business model, we think CSAs, which direct to retail relationships and with shareholders is something which I think Dan, when he started the farm in 1990, was 2. Now we're in the several hundred, and we're not alone. But we were one of the few farms in Litchfield County that had a CSA. So that's innovative to me. That's an economic platform where you have money before you've even put anything in the ground. That didn't exist 20 years ago, and now it does. And your guess is as good as mine about what we can grow in the Northeast. We're at the mercy now of difficult climate. I'm not even going to get into that argument, but it's been a challenge the last couple of years. From late blight, where we had 0 tomatoes in the ground. July 17 of 2009, every single plant in our field died. It was really bizarre. You walked out, they were done. They were just done. So we had to rethink our model too. Do we scale back? What do? What can we grow? And then all of a sudden, kale hit. Kale was our #1 selling vegetable last year. Last 2 years running. We couldn't give it away 15 years ago.
It was a joke 15 years
ago.
ago.
It was a joke.
It's like, well, what do you got? Well, we got kale.
It wasn't even a garnish. It was a punchline. And, now, so, that you kind of have to do, and let the consumer tell you too. We are always asking our clients at markets, at our CSAs, what can we grow for you?
You also have to be willing to be wrong.
Yes. Humility.
You may think you got everything nailed down, and people may not like it. You may think it's the greatest thing ever, and it's too expensive. It doesn't look right. It's not when they eat it. Oh, no, I only eat lettuce in December, January, and February. Wait, what? We have, and that's the way it goes. And you have to be like that, I think, with any of these things. But I think listening to your question, you got to listen.
Dan and Joe, do you have any thoughts on how far the CSA model can go?
I think the CSA model can go incredibly far. So as we were driving up here, you can, I think if you're willing to take what happens on an existing farm, and if that farm is willing to partner with neighboring farms that might do different things,
I think you could see a vegetable farm now suddenly start carrying eggs, might now start carrying meat, might start carrying milk. I think the coordination and so I would see CSAs acting as an aggregator, and I think if the population can see out into the future, at least a couple of weeks. I think one of the challenges in CSAs is you're asking people to take a 6-month leap of faith. It's generally not the way we shop. We certainly shop weekly, and some people shop even more than that. And I think the CSA model will probably have to figure out how the capital works. It tends to be pay up front and then pay later, but I think there's an enormous amount of distance that can go in that, particularly because of technology, because we can learn things so much faster, we can adjust our taste so much faster, we can moderate, we can communicate with the farmer, and then also I think where the CSA distribution points are. I think distribution point. I mean, the reason we have so many supermarkets, it's where 82% of our food is bought. If you have to make it, because I'm busy, I got to do this, I got to do that. But if I'm going to a central place, and also there's so many people. Let's just think of the Northeast. I mean, the New York metro market, which New Haven sort of is broadly part of, I don't know, that many of those people to make a business. So I think there's a big. I think CSA is really tailoring. Joe talked about the supermarkets becoming hybrids. This is like kind of a further tailoring, and it particularly works with higher income people that are willing to pay a little bit more in the early stages. But I think there's a lot to go. Joe?
I would take a slightly different view. I think if you look back at Walnut Acres was a really interesting model founded by a Yale graduate named Paul Keene, and it was sort of a pre-technology forerunner to Fresh Direct or Webvan or that sort of thing. In fact, when they used to do mail-order eggs, they used to send them out in little metal containers, and then you would send the metal containers back to them when you were done. So, you look how far we've come since then. It surprises me. I think it's amazing, and it's great that we've seen CSAs become a blip on the radar, at least, because they weren't that back then. However, my gut feeling about consumers is that we are becoming a nation of assemblers rather than cooks. And so people don't know what to do with raw produce. And I find that even at a store like Sprouts, which was the one that I was most recently running marketing for, which does 30, 35, 40% of its business in produce, which is a very high number, still it's sort of the easy prepared stuff out there. The fun thing about those of us who love food with CSAs is that, you chart or, sort of odd things that you just, you don't know what to do with them, and you go and you research it and you explore and you play with it. I don't have that much faith in where society is going right now and just the time of possibility.
And if I can just tail on that, I agree right in between these two. Because I know that my CSA consumer, look, if you give them kohlrabi and kale 20 straight weeks, there'll be a mutiny. It'll be over. And attrition is an issue in CSAs. It was a fad for a little while to join. Everybody was joining, and then they didn't know what on earth was going on. They didn't even understand the risk. We've just been throwing out CSA, and I hope everybody here knows what that means. It's community-supported agriculture, in which you are sharing the risk. If it rains, if there's disease, if the crop in any way is affected, you are saying to your membership, by being a part of it, that you are okay with it. You're okay with loss. But the consumer, to Joe's point, is not okay with that most of the time. They want what they want. So one of the things that we're innovating, since we're using that word, is that Waldingfield has got to get into some sort of the prepared food business for some of the things that people might not know what to do with. Kohlrabi slaw. It's awesome. If it's made for you and it tastes good, they'll eat it. They won't even think twice about it. But if you gave them a kohlrabi, they wouldn't even know where to go. Even if you gave them a recipe. Because you know what? I don't want to do that. It takes too much time. So somewhere in between, you have to figure out the answers. Now, as Dan pointed out, between Boston and New York City is an extremely crowded, extremely wealthy community. And unfortunately, Connecticut is losing more farmland than anywhere else. But farms like myself, up in the country, eastern Connecticut in particular, there's a lot of space still. There's nobody there. There's a lot of space. But getting stuff from Eastern Connecticut to New Haven to New York City or to Boston is not a big deal. There's plenty of infrastructure. There's main highways. And now all of a sudden there's capital for farmers. We all know that we could start a farm tomorrow if we could just get the land. There are plenty of people who want to farm. But the CSA model is, it's a blip, right? But it's a blip where you can still make a business. I have a friend of mine who has 600. He's got a 500-person waiting list. 1,000. That's not little change. That's a $750,000 business growing organic vegetables in Northwest Connecticut. So I just have a question for you guys. So you see maybe and a joke, I guess perhaps for you, but also Pat, do you think that the challenge here is they work? Because I think that is solvable. I actually think that the biggest rift to a CSA is the location, because I think convenience drives a huge amount of our purchasing decisions, particularly food. And so I see that as a bigger threat, but you guys both focused on, what the hell do I do with rainbow chard? I think the pack can say, I'll make your rainbow slaw. And I can have a CSA that has a prepared food focus, but that still doesn't, minimize the exposure on location. So I just want to, what do you guys think of that?
I do think that the major challenge is what's on the menu there. There's a little company that I became aware of recently called Mile High Organics in Boulder that's trying to basically do this and say, let's take prepared foods, let's take some processed and packaged goods, let's take some fresh goods and throw it all together and make that into essentially a combination of a CSA and Fresh Direct, which I think is great because it opens up a larger menu and it gives a little more flexibility to the consumer and gives them some say in the matter. But I do think that the location issue is a critical one that can't go unsolved. We belong to a program in Phoenix called Chow Locally that, I've got to drive 15, 20 miles on a Saturday before 1 p.m. to be able to go pick it up. And, it's a little hot. And so you want to make sure that you're bringing ice. And I mean, it's really inconvenient. You do it because you believe in it, not because it's easy.
And to that note, at Waldingfield, we have 7 sources, 7 ways to get us, which is more than most farms. I mean, there's some guys who just truck to 10 different locations and do their pickups at, in Westport or wherever. We have pickups at all our farmers markets, for example. We found that getting people to a farmer's market not only helps our CSA because we don't grow everything and we can promote our peers. Like, look, you grow the best strawberries, and go buy her artichokes. Artichokes, yay! We don't. So that's one way. So they have 5 different locations. They can come to our farm, and then we have drop spots. So within that bucket, if you're looking at Waldingfield or a farm like us, you're going to see those options. They're trying to figure out this distribution idea. But on the other side, we don't want to be in the distribution business. We're farmers. And so we have to figure this out. Now, Dan and I can both attest to this, that we've driven trucks. We know that's, if you're the CEO of a company and you're afraid of a small food company, you're afraid of driving a truck, don't go into the food business. If you're afraid of getting, muddy boots, don't go into farming. But I know I don't want to be in the distribution business. I know I have to figure out the best route for me to get to my guy who's going to then distribute, or to get to my client. Home delivery, that model was very popular for a while, and then people in that industry realized, wow, wait a minute, this is hard. Trucks break down. Weather. I don't want to do that. So again, that's where the innovation comes in. Some of the food and tech marriages that have happened out of the West Coast are now in New York City, places that are figuring out this issue. Fresh Direct. Fresh Direct is great, but it's expensive. It's $4.50 every time you make an order. So again, but they figured it out. And Whole Foods. When Whole Foods opened up the Cheshire hub, I didn't have to make 10 different stops. I made 1 stop. All of a sudden, my distribution got a little bit better. And the same thing works for the CSA model. Figure out a way that works for you. Don't be so desperate for the business that it's going to run you ragged, that you're going to spend money on trucking and gas, because it adds up. The goal of this is to make a profit, and also get good food to people. So
So we're kind of staring down the last 10 minutes and I would love to hear a couple of your questions. So I'm actually just going to take them from the floor, and I see your hand first.
Hi, my name is Zoe Lloyd, and I worked for a local food distributor in Philadelphia called Common Market. We were really focused on getting healthy local food to people of lower income, which was proved to be very, very difficult. And one of the ways in which we did that was through a farm share program where we were trying to work with, and this hasn't actually occurred yet, but trying to work with institutions of faith to get to get local food to these communities. And I think a lot of the discussion today has been around getting food to people of not necessarily higher income, but middle and higher income levels. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges there, and if you see any opportunities in getting food to people of lower incomes and yeah.
It's a big challenge, there's no doubt. Whole Foods has earned its nickname over the years, but I also think that it's undeserved in many ways. What has had to happen in the supermarket side, the retail side of the business, is we had to get to mass. That, and I don't mean that in the faith sense of it. We had to get to a scale at which companies could be producing product affordably. I brought a little sample here of an organic chocolate bar called Ocho. This is made by a guy who's a Yale SOM grad named Dennis Ring. He's a fantastic guy. Dennis sells these for, I don't know, $2.50 or, it's a tiny little bar. He's doing well with his business, but until he gets the sort of distribution that's beyond just a few regions of Whole Foods and a few Fresh and Easy and, here and there, his production costs are going to be such that he's going to have to sell it at that rate. And it's kind of the same thing with a lot of the products out there from the supermarket side. I think we also have not done a very good job of opening our minds to different models, and the urban model of being able to open stores in parts of the cities that are underserved. Whole Foods has started to come around to that a little bit, but Whole Foods and Sprouts and all these other guys, they're not going to be the answers to that. You're the answer to that, quite honestly. I mean, I think that the best way ultimately that we're going to be able to reach the underserved populations is by people physically making that bridge, educating them as to why cheap additives make for cheap food but aren't good for you, and working with some of the manufacturers and perhaps some of the retailers and certainly some of the producers as well to be able to get the product to them.
I'll actually take your question so we can get a couple in.
I'm Brian Cal from Graduate School of Management. Prior to coming to SOM, my friends and I were trying to start a hydroponic farm to grow butter lettuce, and we kind of followed Patrick's model of working with chefs. There was a lot of interest in buying locally grown butter lettuce, but we didn't have any idea of what we could price at. There was a lot of opaqueness. We look at USDA promo pricing, that was really, really low, and chefs or buyers at restaurants weren't very transparent on what they were willing to pay. How did you overcome that pricing obstacle?
That's a great question. You want to talk about a lack of transparency. Walk into a restaurant and see how it's like, how much is you charging for that? Now, after a certain amount of time, you realize that if somebody's getting $14 a plate for an heirloom tomato and they're going by 4 slices, and you've just told them whoa, nice profit turn on that. But you've got to be willing to do a little bit of homework. Yes, the U.S. national pricing model is going to be the bottom of the tier, but it's actually not a bad place to start, because then you know the actual minimum you need to grow to turn a profit, right? Then you have to kind of go and hydroponic farms in the Northeast, what are there, probably about 100 now that are making. Connecticut has 2 very, very large ones now. Bruce Dryzick's farm sells hydroponic bib lettuce to Stu Leonard's. I think he does, 10,000 cases a month. I mean, it's something large. And, it's 30 days. He's in and out. He's constantly moving it. But chefs, they're not necessarily, selling it to cooperating with a farmer's market. maybe finding a wholesale distributor who only works in a specific field is going to be a better angle than going to, say, Hunts Point, where you're competing with, huge volume.
I just want to chime in here. I think this is actually kind of a great SOM question, because you're talking about building a price curve. Okay, you could probably find 5 people on the planet that would pay you $50 a head, right? And then, so that's on the top end, and then it slopes down kind of steeply, and then it starts to flatten out, and it's got its tail. And the USDA number is really representing a certain percentage. I would argue it's probably representing about 75% of the country. So you kind of know where 1 to 25% of the population is, and you can imagine the starting point. It's just figuring out how big the market is as you come down that price curve. I mean, you follow me here? So I think, and then you have to dig into the business. I study the price curve all the time. I mean, milk, super competitive. Sour cream, half and half, less competitive. Apple juice, competitive unless you can be different. And what I would recommend is you have to imagine about a generic price curve, but you have to be special. There has to be a reason that you're going to extract a premium. And if there's not a reason, no one's going to pay it. And you have to be really tough on yourself. But you have to get into the market. Find out how much people are buying. Walk into the back of a kitchen. Walk into a supermarket. Find someone that's worked in a supermarket. And it's different by region. Albany's is extremely price sensitive. Westchester County, less so. Southern Connecticut, less so. But they've got different habits. They think differently than people in New Jersey. Gosh, they're so close. How's this possible? Well, they do. You got to get in there and learn them, but it's learnable. It's definitely learnable. Yeah.
One of the terms that y'all have used is the term natural, but I know there's been a lot of conversation writing about food and marketing, and sort of recognition about what natural really means and how companies are using it and things like that. So I was just wondering if you can speak to that issue and if you think it'll continue to mean anything.
Yeah. Dan mentioned earlier that in the early days when he was getting started with the farm that organic meant nothing, and that's true. You could have gone to a store back in the late 80s and early 90s, and you would have seen side by side on the shelf something that said Pennsylvania organic, Colorado organic, California organic, and they all meant different things based on the state's criteria for what it meant to be certified as an organic farmer. Well, we solved that problem eventually. The Organic Foods Production Act was passed in 1990. It was ultimately implemented in 2002. Took that long. That's where we are with natural right now. Natural, to those of us in the industry, does mean something. It generally means it's a product that's made without any artificial flavors, preservatives, colorings, and so on and so forth. But there are many companies that take advantage of that vagueness, that gushiness, in a lot of bad ways. And then there are also examples of, like Pepsi-Cola, run by an SOM grad, which asked its Frito-Lay division to change all its formulations to go all natural by whatever definition they were using there. I do think we will probably get to a formal definition of natural at some point in the near future. There are various constituencies within the industry that are arguing that we should do it, that we shouldn't do it. The FMI, Food Marketing Institute, and the Grocery Manufacturing Association, which are sort of tools of the conventional side of the industry, are trying to preclude the whole argument by creating their own definitions of it. But, I would tell you, as somebody who's been on the inside and worked with a lot of manufacturers, I do feel confident, I feel good when I see things that are marked as natural, that the people are doing the right thing. But we are now where we were with organic back then, and it has to change.
Pat or Dan, any thoughts on certified natural?
Yeah, I just spoke to the NOFA Young Farmers Conference about this very issue, about the importance of getting certified organic. And one of the reasons I'm really firmly in the camp of certification is because the parameters are there for the consumer. They have an idea. They might not know the specifics, but they have an idea at a certain standard that has been. I use 2 examples. One, Foxy lettuce, big, time lettuce company, right? They have an organic brand now. And as much as it makes me recoil to think about that, I see two things out of this. I know the land that it's grown on has gone through a certification process. I know that there's not a GMO in sight because that is against organic certification laws nationwide. So that, as a consumer, says, all right, this is okay. Now, I'm not going to buy Foxy Organic, but they have it because they saw an opportunity to get into the organic world. On the flip side, with natural, and there's a vagueness to the language, which I think is the point that you were really addressing, is that the consumer doesn't quite know yet. So if you go to certain websites, good, and so user-friendly, there are, everything you want to know about that company is there. And I applaud them. I think the companies have to be willing to be open about it. Look, we're all natural. We're not a certified organic operation, but this is what we do. And you've got the consumer has to take some responsibility on this. We spend an awful lot of time re-educating people. And we can fight all day as to what the mileage is for local. Park Slope Co-op in Brooklyn, where I spend half the year, most officious place in America, they have 500 miles. Well, Dan and I think 275 is actually a model which we're happy with. Why the difference? Walmart wanted 750 in the Farm Bill, didn't get it. So again, it's an ongoing dialogue. I think the consumer has to always ask, and also the dollars will tell the company what natural means to them. Like, this isn't Smucker's natural, it ain't natural, right? But
I wonder if I could take a last question for Dan. And actually, John, I think I saw you put your hand up first.
Yeah, John Wargo, I'm a professor at forestry as well as in the question is about food additives and food contaminants, and especially focused on the generally regarded as safe category. So the Pew Trust about a year ago came out with a very good report, I thought, that cataloged the different kinds of additives, from colors to flavors to antioxidants, and they tallied it up, and the number of additives is now over 10,000. And most consumers don't understand that.
They don't.
And it strikes me that I'm just wondering how you think that might play into consumer perception of what's natural or what's organic or what's safe. Because most of these chemicals, once they are designated as generally regarded as safe, don't need any labeling.
Right. So we face that all the time. Here's a tangible example. We have an apple juice. Most apple juice in this country, 95, 96% comes from China. Most people don't know that. When you make apple juice, and yet there are apples in almost all the regions of the country. So we were making apple juice. We went to a big press in Pennsylvania to bring our apples, and they wanted to put these enzymes in to help with the processing. They were generally regarded as safe. We're like, well, hold on a second. How come you're, the only ingredient we want in our apple juice is apples. It's like, no, you don't need to list these. It's like, well, we just wanted to understand why. And two of them were to keep their industrial machines clean, not to help the food. One was to help the food, but two were not. The public didn't know it. So now fast forward to our label. So we decided to, not go with them. We wanted to find someone that would just take the apples and be willing to pay the extra cleaning costs to clean the plant that they needed, because otherwise it was going to gum up their filters. What we are finding is that there's incredible strength in transparency, and I think that sooner or later this list of unmentionables is going to become exposed, and that the more doubt that's out there, and the more open you are from the beginning. Again, a tremendous opportunity for smaller operators. If you start out without all these additional working agents, and some of them are, you could argue, are perfectly valid, particularly if you're trying to solve perishability questions in underserved areas. Like, hey, we really need this thing to get another week, because otherwise I've got 50,000 people that aren't going to be able to eat this. And if I add it, and it is generally regarded as safe, they all can. To engage the consumer at a very grassroots level, and make known that your brand is not participating in this, is the way forward. Because I think that it's a big problem. And I also think the public turns off. 1% people in this room are very interested. Everyone else, you know what? I just came to buy my groceries. I don't want to lecture, kid. It's like but I think it's a big challenge, but I think it's solvable. But I think transparency is the route, but it's not going to be a fast solve because transparency means that they'll be able to continue not to list it. But the companies that do list are any changes and point out, hey, ask if this is in it. I think you also have some help coming from the allergen. The whole sort of the allergen movement is saying, and I call it a movement because it's really hard to exactly locate. Is this an allergy? Is this a toxic? Like, what exactly is happening here? But that voice is loud, and it can be fatal. And so it's raising real flags.
Steve, Victoria had 12:45 as the end time. Is that correct? Then we should really wrap things up. Thank you to all of our panelists here. It was enlightening and a delight to hear your perspectives. And thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon.
I was just going to say that Pat and I are going to be around till 3:30 if anybody has any questions or anything like that.